Good afternoon. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'm joined again by co-hosts Mark Morash and Henry Pietras. And we're still talking about the Democratic National Convention in July of 2016. We're going to focus a little bit more on issues, because the issues and how they ended up in the platform and how the platform was changed is an important part. This one being the Trans-Pacific Partnership, of course, which we managed to get candidate Hillary Clinton, who had said that the TPP was the gold standard of trade agreements, to change her mind. She didn't get the party to change its mind on the platform, but one step at a time. Henry, tell us more about day two at the convention.
Well, day two, we got there fairly early for breakfast, and then as we were walking around near City Hall in Philadelphia, we bumped into the Philadelphia Convention Center. Mm-hmm. And there were a whole bunch of different tracks or seminars that were being given to various groups, including teachers. And I was going to attend one on climate change. But then as we walked in, we got wind that Bernie was going to be talking. So as soon as we found out where, we ran over. It took us close to 20 minutes to get to the room because, par for the course, the Democrats were trying to bury Bernie as much as possible. So he ended up being about 20 minutes away from where we entered the building. It was totally on the opposite end of the convention center, which I think is about a mile long at least. And we got there to the door only to find out that only people with credentials were allowed in. And also, we got into the door, but right behind us, they closed off the security so more people couldn't get in. We ended up sneaking in for a few minutes. So we did see Bernie speak, and we did hear him speak because there were speakers outside that carried the audio. Mm-hmm. It was, it was a highlight for us, but more than anything else, I think it was the conversation with all the people we met. We ended up sitting outside by the City Hall, really nice place with benches and there was a cafe nearby. So we just watched people go by, but
and
at the same time,
and the water spouts for the kids to play in. It was wonderful. And quick shout out to two folks that were with us, yes. James Root and Cindy Davis. It was great company.
Yep.
Now, on the other side of the equation, we had a person that we know pretty well and whose trip to Philadelphia we had financed as a delegate for Bernie, Bob Barreau. And Bob, door's still open. We want you to come in and talk about your experience and what you're thinking going forward. I don't know if all's forgiven yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah, Robert was. We bumped into him a couple of times at the door, right before the entrance. As he was going in, we did speak briefly. He was not in a good mood at the time, but hopefully, in light of the fact and how he voted, which he voted as he was obligated to vote, which was for Bernie.
As a delegate, yep.
Although he did annoy a number of people simply because he declared that he was going to work for Hillary when he was obligated to vote for Bernie. But let's assume that everything is fine at this point. What the most exciting thing out of Philadelphia, I think, was the conversations we ended up having with people, including people coming into the subway and out of the subway. Right by the water fountains, there was a subway entrance. And we actually had to take shelter because it ended up raining quite severely.
Oh, what a storm that was. Oh, my goodness. It was about an inch a minute, I think. It was really coming down.
And in there, we bumped into two people who were delegates, for Bernie delegates. Mm-hmm. One was from Wisconsin, and another one came from Arizona. And if you want, I'll talk about the lady from Wisconsin.
Sure, yeah.
She was a delegate.
It's some good conversations.
It was past 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and I asked her, aren't you supposed to be at the convention? She says, oh no, we're done voting, so I'm going back to my hotel room. But we got into a conversation about the issues they're having with Governor Walker in Wisconsin. The first one is that the state is selling off a lot of farmland to foreign entities. The other one was that the state was underfunding college education. And also they were selling off public facilities, buildings and so on, to foreign entities as well. And she was very distraught about those three things. So we had a very extensive conversation about that.
Yeah, Mike Pence's Indiana did that with their Interstate 70, I believe it was. They sold the entire stretch of Interstate 70 through Indiana to the Chinese.
Yeah.
And for taking care of the road, the Chinese will be able to put tolls wherever they want to, and collect as much as the market will bear.
Yep.
So,
and by the way, I know for a fact that the Waldorf Astoria just got sold to the Chinese.
yep.
Yeah.
So I-70, lots of advertising on the sides of the roads to make up that money. Be kind of like the film Demolition Man, where everywhere they walk, there's ads that pop up that are tailored to individual people.
And since China's close to Burma, they can bring back the old Burma shave signs. The little rhymes where you would go along the road and da 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 da. Use Burma shave.
We should do a show on Burma someday and the human rights abuses going on there,
Yeah.
because right now the junta is continuing to crack down on the Muslim minorities on the north side of the country right now.
Are you talking about Burma, or are you talking about America?
Well, seeing as America hasn't stood up for the last 60 years and said anything about the military junta that took over there, we'll say either or. Given that there's a Nobel Peace Prize winner essentially living in Burma whose party won a democratic election, was not allowed to take over. Is it Burma or America?
Is it Burma or America? We're getting our countries mixed up here. Hey, let's talk about Cuba.
Are we talking about America or Cuba?
Yeah. Because Cuba's got, a repressive dictatorship that will probably continue. But at the same time, they've got a couple of good things going for them that America does not. They have some really fine doctors dispensing some pretty good medical care.
All over the world.
Yeah. And people go to Cuba because their doctors are renowned, and their health care is paid for, even to foreigners. And now we'll have Emily Bolfin-Testa back on the show next week, talking about health care and the time she's dual Italian-American citizenship, and when one of the times she was in Italy, an American citizen in Italy, she had an injury, and she just went to the dispensary where they took care of her beautifully. No charge, no fee, no question about, are you an American, are you an Italian? They just go in and they take care of you. And that's what we would have in America if we did not have HMOs. So.
You mean the ability to care for people?
Yeah, where doctors could actually care for people.
Need.
Yeah, care for people rather than fill out forms and battle with HMOs.
Big pharmaceutical companies that aren't listed on the stock exchange. Insurance companies who aren't worried about their bottom line.
And I'm just going to put a little nostalgia into our trip to Philly, and this is who we were there for, and this is who was there for us in Philadelphia, and this is who is getting a lot of time on television now. I'm not sure exactly where Hillary Clinton went to, but she hasn't been on the news since the election.
She's eating pizza.
Pizza? Which pizza place do you think she would go to in New York?
Not in New York. There's the one in D.C. that she favors.
Okay. Well, New York, she could go to Patsy's up in Spanish Harlem.
They have the special pizza in D.C.
I'm not catching. You're smirking. I'm not
La,
catching.
la, 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 la.
Help! Help!
La, la, la,
I'm not sure what
la,
exactly.
la, la, la. Anyone who's watching us on the internet's chuckling right now, so cool. Anyhow, moving back to Philadelphia.
I'll go back and look at the episode and
Cheesesteak.
see. Oh, Philly cheesesteak. Okay. Issues.
We've covered the TPP. We covered that a lot. We covered last week the Robin Hood tax, which is where these hats came from. There were folks down there actively advocating for the Robin Hood tax, which Bernie always talks about taxing Wall Street speculation. He never used the phrase Robin Hood tax as far as I remember, but essentially it's a 0.5% on every $100 of Wall Street transaction, less for non-stock transactions, but they estimated that they could raise $300 billion a year for infrastructure repairs, so on and so forth.
And by the way, that also pays for tuition-free college.
And tuition-free
That's
college.
$80 billion.
Yes.
Also, that pays for, if we wanted to, prisons, which is also about $80 billion.
0.5%. 0.5% on every transaction. 0.5%. I can't even see that 0.5%. The other option.
I don't think, in light of the fact that we begrudgingly pay in Connecticut 6.35% on every purchase we make that's not super necessary, food, unprocessed food, clothing under 60, I think it's $60 is the limit in Connecticut. There's an equality amongst the wealthy all the way down to the not wealthy on that matter. But hey, here's another booth we went to in Philadelphia. And it's, you folks might have heard of AIPAC, what used to be called the American Israeli Political Action Committee, until they softened the name up and changed it to something sounding a little more Political Action Committee-ish. But J Street. Now, J Street is a group of Jewish Americans and Israelis that are, in fact, in favor of equality between Israelis and Palestinians. Fair treatment for everybody. And at this point, it's the Palestinians that are pretty much on the short end of that stick. But J Street also in favor of the Iran nuclear deal. The deal that the president-elect is talking about shelving, and he hasn't backed away on that one yet, although he may.
You know, what this reminds me of, I think, is the moment where, in Bernie's campaign, and there are a lot of things that I admire about what he did during the campaign, but there was the debate in New York, and inevitably, New York has a large Jewish population. The topic of Israel and the Palestinian people came up. And on that stage in New York, in an audience that he knew would be just short of antagonistic toward what he was going to say, he stood up there and said that the Israeli response to the Palestinian uprising a couple of years back was militaristically too strong, that it was uncalled for and unnecessary when they essentially launched a full-scale attack into the Palestinian neighborhoods. And I thought to myself, watching him say that, doing what he does all the time, saying the same thing no matter the audience, no matter the situation, sticking to what he believes. And he knew it was going to cost him votes. They brought that up because they knew what the reaction would be, because the entire U.S. government, Hillary Clinton certainly, because of her war hawk nature, they all believe that the endless militaristic response to the shrinking Palestinian land is inevitably justified. He stood up there and said, no, it wasn't. And I thought to myself, my goodness, that man's running for president. And he had the brave heart to be able to still stand up for those people. I thought to myself, there should never be a moment in my life where I fear standing up for the downtrodden people. If he's running for president and can do that, I have no justification or excuse to be afraid, ever.
Right or wrong, it's not a matter of what's politically expedient, but a matter of morality, a matter of saying what's right, just, and moral. And on the issue of Israeli government, at least the current Israeli government, because Israel's had some good, reasonable governments in the past, they just don't happen to have one right now. When the Palestinians fired a couple of rockets into Israel, Israel's response was basically to carpet bomb Beirut, Lebanon. And that's basically what they did.
Well, it's like having Hillary Clinton call Henry Kissinger a friend and mentor. Hey, Hank, if you're watching, since you're local, why don't you come on the show? I mean, it's a short drive for you. We'd love to have you on. It was a great interview in the Atlantic Monthly a few weeks back. Why don't you come on and talk about it? I'm willing to, not have the Henry Kissinger Good Morning cover on set that day. But seriously, I mean, it's these little things that you realize made a huge difference in the campaign and should have made a huge difference in those subtle ways where you realize there were multiple times where Bernie stood against the militaristic establishment again and again and again. And it's just, those are the things that will live on in legend and lore about the whole thing. And it exacerbates the absolute crime that he was not running for president.
Henry, bring us back to the convention center where we're at, where we saw Bernie speak. At least we heard Bernie speak. There were a lot of booths there, a lot of booths from a lot of groups.
Yeah.
What were the ones that impressed you the most?
Well, the one I was most interested in is the one on journalism. It's the one that gave out a one-pager about the journalistic code of ethics. And that, I think, was the most impressive. We spent quite a bit of time with the lady that was there, and she was spot on. And we perceive that the media is not serving us. Personally, I call it, stop watching the media, and because it's national poison. And unless we, in a way, make it known that we're not watching until things change, where they're actually being factual as opposed to sensational, then that they're not serving us and therefore not deserving of any time on our part that ultimately ends up in their making income.
What were some of the things that have been said that you can remember recently, that things that were said on any or all of the stations, the major stations, Fox, CNN, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, statements that were not factual in the least and yet weren't challenged?
Well, I heard on NPR recently that I was listening to a scientist, a climatologist from Texas, and she basically said that in her view, clean coal or fossil-based energy is on par with solar energy. And the person never challenged her on that. And this is supposedly from a scientist, but she was not being accurate because they never tell you about the assumptions. So if gas costs you $1 and solar costs you $1, okay, think about the damage to the planet. That's never mentioned. Okay, does anybody ever factor in the damage to health, to the environment, to life on this planet?
Things that
none of that is mentioned. I mean, can you put a dollar amount on that?
Yeah, things that happen after the fact when they draw a fraction.
But this lady comes out and claims that she's a scientist and therefore, in her view, these two solutions are equivalent. I don't think so.
So she's ignoring the after effects and the after damage that costs money to clean up.
Exactly. None of that was challenged. She just was allowed to just say that and throw it out there.
All right, your turn.
my brain is going around and going, which one should I pick? Spin, 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 spin. We mentioned before, so I'm going to be boorish, but when the CNN host said that it is illegal for us groundlings to read the WikiLeaks emails, but it's okay for CNN to, and they would tell us what was in them. But I think more recently and more poignant is that a couple of the news stations ran with the story that the reason the Morton County sheriffs in North Dakota were using the water cannons at the Dakota Access Pipeline protest is that the protesters had started fires, and that they were only using the water cannons to put out the fires. And of course, there's tons of video footage showing people being blasted by these water cannons. So either the fire is off frame and they're the worst aim with a fire hose ever. I guess they couldn't get any firemen out there, and the police are using a water hose and they're not trained, and so or the people had been dancing in the fire, and we just got footage of after the fire was out and they hadn't yet turned off the hose, and the national news was willing to run with that. Although we're starting, I think, slowly to see that turn. In a strange turn of events, the New York Times did an editorial that the militaristic police response against the protesters was overwrought.
Well, we've seen that in Ferguson as well. Maybe you can talk about the pushback Bernie just had on CNN.
Oh, about the not playing identity politics?
Well, it was about the recount.
Oh, about the recount.
Yeah. And what Trump said about it.
No, I didn't see.
Okay. Well, I read the article, and Bernie really pushed back against the anchor because she kept, Bernie answered the question basically saying, if the candidates demand a recount, it's their right to ask for one. And so he basically answered the question, but the anchor wouldn't drop, and just kept pushing it and repeating it over and over, going for the sensational, other than talking about the issues.
Do we want to talk about the recount? Do we want to talk about this? Do we want to shift here, or do we want to save that for another time?
I don't know. We could touch on it lightly now, because as we know that the Democratic Party is not paying for the recount, which is their entitlement. It's their right. They can choose not to. But it's the Green Party that's paying for the recount, just as the Green Party did in Ohio in 2004, when there was charges of a lot of irregularities, and John Kerry, the Democratic Party presidential candidate, had said that if in fact they thought there were any shenanigans in Ohio, that they would go for a recount and have literally an army of attorneys on the ground to view that recount. Well, the election ended. Bush won by a slim majority in Ohio. As the Secretary of State of Ohio, Ken Blackwell, had promised, and as the owner of Diebold, the company that made the machines that counted the votes without a paper trail in Ohio, had promised. And in came the Green Party, and David Cobb gathered up some money and paid for the recount. And unfortunately, with Ken Blackwell, law demanded that he choose randomly selected precincts to recount. And in fact, what he did was he went around that and he chose the precincts that he wanted to have recounted. So now, fast forward to 2016, and we'll see what happens with the recounts. In I think it's a statewide recount.
Yes, and
so there's no choosing.
Touching lightly with a feather, very gently.
Yeah.
My light touch on the recount issue is simply, why, if I don't believe the results the first time, will I bother to believe the results the second time? Why do I think they will get it accurately the second time if they couldn't the first?
Well, if they're doing a hand recount and they've got paper ballots, I have a strong belief
No,
that
the state, whatever the first state is that they're recounting is Wisconsin.
correct.
They said that they're not going to do a hand recount. They're going to do a recount, but they're not going to do
They're
a
just
hand
going to take the
recount.
paper ballots and running through the machine again?
I'm not sure, but there's been some pushback about the idea that they're going to hand recount everything.
Yeah, yeah. And now I believe Michigan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Michigan, which is up for, it's going to be chosen to for a recount. They have paper ballots too, I believe. So at least they'll be running the ballots through the starting at zero, making sure the machines are zeroed out to begin with, because that's one of the ways you can flip votes is by starting a machine at not 0-0. But if they send all the ballots through the machines again in Wisconsin and Michigan, you should get an accurate view. I mean, hand count.
Assuming all the ballots are still there, assuming no ballots have been added, assuming no ballots have had an extra mark put on them, make them invalidated.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I have reached the point of complete Zen voter agnosticism. I believe none of it.
Well, Stein's point in paying for it is not to get Hillary Clinton elected. It's certainly not to get Jill Stein any more votes, because Jill Stein lost substantially. There's nothing in it for Jill Stein. Her point is not to get Clinton elected, but her point is to show whether or not the machines are accurate. That's the whole point, is to either allay people's fears about the machines, if the numbers match up, or to cast a very bright light on the machines if it turns out they're inaccurate.
Diebold makes voting machines. They make ATM machines. ATM machines spit out receipts. Receipt-driven voting.
Yeah.
Being able to check it to make sure that the vote you voted is tallied as you voted.
Walking out with a piece of paper which says you voted this way on all these elections, so you have a record of it, just as if you went to the ATM and took out $20. That's been Progressive Soup. We'll be back next week with a visit from Emily Volpentesto beyond to talk about health care and how licensed massage therapy and other alternative medicines fit into health care. And as always, she'll have some good stories to share with us. David Stevenson, Mark Morash, Henry Pietras, thank you for joining us.